Welcome to Charleston. Welcome to the third Ingenics podcast under the name Transformation Talks, which we learned after the first recording. There's like 6,000 companies using the exact same name, so we didn't come up with that name. But it's still a good name. For this third episode, we have a name that's a bit of a, it's rather long, and we've gone back and forth. And what do we call this? What's the title going to be? So I'll try to chop it up into section a little bit. So today we're going to talk about supply chain transparency. So overall, we'll talk, I would say 75% about supply chain, and then also a little bit about operations, warehousing, materials moving around in your facility. And then what we try to cover is essentially how to manage theft and assets. Also do work with corrosion predictions, which is something completely different, and then also cover process adherence with one tool. So these three different sections, we want to talk about how can that be managed with one tool. And when I say one tool, it's really one solution because there's different elements to it. So let's start with a quick introduction of our guests here today. Last time we had a guest from Greenville, so it was just a one-on-one, and we said this time we want to spice things up a little bit, also invite a guest from outside of Ingenics. So Gabriel, maybe you start with an introduction of who you are and what's your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gabriel Weeks from GPX Intelligence. GPX Intelligence is a location data service provider that uses GPS and BLE technology, as well as surfacing those insights and analytics through our platform to help empower businesses. A little background on myself, been GPX for 3 years, seen a lot of growth in the B2B side of the business, and have been partnering with Ingenics almost the whole way through, and super grateful for the partnership that we have with y'all, and think we're doing some great work in the field, and excited to talk about it here today.
Perfect. And you are from?
I am from Boston, Massachusetts.
Perfect. Yeah, well, I think we'll start a little map and just put little pins and where our guests are coming from. We'll try to make this a little bit more, at least US-wide, and not just, Southeast. Okay, yeah. It's great that you're here. It's great that you took a flight this morning at 6 a.m. just to speak here and then later do some more here in Charleston. But yeah, our second guest is Patrick, and I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Patrick DeKold, also with Ingenics, but working up in our Greenville office, which is our U.S. headquarters, and I'm our director of supply chain. So basically that means that for Ingenics here in the U.S., it's my goal to make sure that all of our consultants working on supply chain projects are following our best practices, and we're learning from different customers, different projects going on, what the best way to do things is. And fortunately, I've had the opportunity to work with GPX the past few years, and we have some pretty cool project experience to share with the listeners. But
Great.
I've been with Ingenics for about 8 years. I'm from Atlanta. I don't have that Boston accent.
Yeah. And, I always try to, make this a little bit personal level. So you and me, we go back all of the years, right? So we started, was I still an intern or was I just a junior consultant? I think I was still an intern and you were an intern.
Exactly,
and then we both started with Ingenics and just,
crazy.
Worked through the years and the ranks. So,
absolutely.
I remember these times.
8 years is a lifetime.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it feels like a long time.
Not gonna lie, but yeah. That's a topic for another podcast. Okay, good. Then we'll switch a little bit into what we want to cover today. So, like I said, we're gonna focus mostly on supply chain transparency topics. Also talk a little bit about operational efficiencies and excellence. So, we're gonna start off by talking about what is the problem the problems that we encountered that we're trying to solve, and then from there jump a little bit to a solution to that problem that we did, that we're still doing, that we hope that we can even do more, because for us this is a field that is currently underutilized, and then do a little bit, as always, an outlook into the future, what's being worked on, what's next. We'll talk a little bit about AI. Yeah, we had a discussion, do we want to talk about AI or not, or do we leave it out? I think we have to talk about AI, so we'll do that towards the end, and then wrap things up with a couple key takeaways. So maybe let's start with really where does this come from? What was the problem? And first question for you there, Patrick. You were, I think, for Ingenics, the first person being exposed to the GPX technology and the solutions with it. So where did this come from? What happened? and kind of how did it evolve?
Yeah, sure. So maybe to back it up to the beginning, we're working with one of our large automotive manufacturers, and our role in that specific project was to steer the returnable containers for that OEM. So for those who are not familiar with the processes of an OEM supply chain, a manufacturing supply chain, the manufacturer is often responsible for shipping returnable containers to their suppliers so that the suppliers can pack parts into them and then get them back to the manufacturer on time in the right quantity, and obviously in a very lean way. So not much buffer involved in the process. It's actually a very critical component of the manufacturing process for this to go smoothly. And so in our project with this customer, we noticed that the returnable containers had a very high fallout. Containers are they look very simple, I would say. It looks like they're plastic boxes. Maybe you have metal racks that parts are being put into, but they're actually quite expensive. And you have thousands of these. I mean, you could have hundreds of custom designs, each custom design produced hundreds of times, just in order to keep up with the volume at the OEM. So when you start to have a high degree of fallout, things start to get expensive quickly. And additionally, if you're not steering these containers correctly, you start to, I think, bump into a lot of other processes downstream in the supply chain, which can even cause production delays. And in this industry, for automotive, that can be very expensive if you have minutes of downtime. So we thought, how can we increase the visibility of these materials so that we can reduce the amount of downtime as a result in the process? At the time, our customer actually already had some type of IoT technology involved in the process. So they were using shock monitoring sensors, and they were looking for impacts that are happening to materials on the supply chain. But at the same time, we were actually getting location data about where the shocks were occurring. And the location data for us actually became a lot more valuable, and it was telling us all this information. I mean, we had shocks going on in locations where there shouldn't even be parts. So we really wanted to lean in on that location data side of things, and ultimately got connected with GPX and had the opportunity to use their technology, which was a big step up from what we were using before. It allowed us to really cost effectively collect a lot more of this data at once.
Okay, so it started with, if I understand you correctly, container tracking. So you're saying essentially the containers are often more valuable than the parts itself. Usually you would think parts tracking is the important piece or is the critical piece, but in automotive manufacturing, the containers which allow you to transport the parts, those are, if you look at it, one container and 50 parts in the container is usually more valuable. So it started with looking at where are they, why are they getting lost, why are the parts broken, and then from there, what is it you initially tried to solve?
Yes, it was really the I would say the asset loss, which for us was the loss of the packaging itself.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes the packaging is more expensive than the parts, but your part value is obviously a lot higher. So
okay.
I think another valuable part of that proposition too is it's not just the container; it's the downstream impacts of the loss of a container, right? Yeah. Because that container needs to be replaced, so you have the replacement costs that you incur. But while you're in the process of replacing that container, you might be using corrugated or expendable, think cardboard packaging to move things, which is more expensive, also against your sustainability initiatives. And you might need to overnight or express parts to a production facility, which causes you to incur pretty significant transportation costs. So I always have to explain this to the people in my life who don't understand what I do. It's not just about the box. It's about everything associated with the loss of the box or having to attack that issue of limited containers.
The impact it has downstream, avoiding alternative packaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't just an issue for our client, the OEM. I mean, the suppliers have issues from this as well. I mean, if they don't have returnable packaging at their facility in time, they're repacking. They have to pack their materials into cardboard or something like that. They have to have more labor hours to, repack those materials back into a returnable box, and then you have all the quality risks and other things that you had mentioned as well. So
before we jump to the potential solution, like how was this done before? Like you lose a container, you lose a truck, you lose containers. How How did the OEM or how did we try to solve this before?
That's a great question. I mean, a lot of companies don't really have another alternative set up. So, in their case, if they start to have issues with containers being delivered on time, they either assume it's some kind of process issue. They assume that, there's something wrong that they planned originally when they calculated how many containers they needed, and they simply repurchase more. Mm-hmm. And it's almost this never-ending cycle of rebuying just to keep the loops running, but there's never a root cause identified.
Right.
And the OEM ends up eating that cost.
So you just take a certain percentage of containers getting lost yearly. Okay.
Yep.
Understood. I think that explains the baseline well. What was the problem? Where did this come from? So, and there wasn't really a good solution in place. So maybe then we'll do the switch a little bit towards the solution. So Gabriel, with GPX, maybe tell us a little bit about the technology. I'm always interested about the story. Who started this? Where does the idea come from? How did it grow? What can it do now? So maybe give us a little introduction.
Yeah, most definitely. So GPX was originally founded as an e-commerce business, really just GPS trackers to individuals looking to keep track of valuable assets, loved ones, track their vehicles or maybe their motorcycles. Mm-hmm. From there, we kind of identified the opportunity as it relates to the B2B problems that can be solved. And so the GPX brand was stood up. So we started to think about how can we leverage GPS technology to start to empower businesses, provide them objective insights that are going to really give them information directly from the source to where their valuable business assets are. I think a lot of times when people think GPS technology, it's, hey, I have a valuable combine that my business relies on, or I have valuable tools and equipment that my business relies on. And that is a large part of where GPS can help businesses. But where we really started to identify opportunities by working with automotive suppliers and manufacturers is how can we start to leverage GPS, BLE, location data to help inform those supply chains. Historically, there's been a lot of opacity as it relates to supply chains because you rely on many external partners for information that you hope is objective and accurate, but sometimes there can be competing priorities as you look across businesses. And so by leveraging a technical resource like GPS, BLE, and a mesh framework to identify where those assets are and how they're moving, you can really eliminate a lot of that ambiguity. And what GPX really prides itself on is it's not just the GPS tracker, right? I think that those are a dime a dozen. It's the platform that we use to surface the information, the analytics that we can drive to help analyze it, and then also the partnerships we can build with our customer base, but with solutions providers like Ingenics, to start to drive change and evolution in the businesses by just providing objective, easily analyzed location data to help drive action.
Yep. So it started with tracking your dog, and it evolved into tracking, valuable containers with engines, and maybe you are still doing the dog tracking, but the focus of your business is in the B2B space, right?
Yep, focus is in the B2B space.
Perfect. And I think everyone knows what GPS tracking is. Explain BLE. I had to look this one up. I know now what it is, but what's behind the term BLE?
Yeah, I think the best way to explain it is something almost everybody's familiar with is an Apple AirTag, right? The way an Apple AirTag communicates its position to you is you attach it to something you care about. It communicates with the local iPhone. The iPhone says, I'm here, and this Apple AirTag is here with me, right? Mm-hmm. So BLE stands for Bluetooth Low Energy. It's a passive signal that's being emitted at all times by a BLE device that can then be partnered with the GPS devices that GPX is able to deploy to not only tell you where assets tagged with BLE are positioned, but also you can start to use BLE beacons and technology to develop location frameworks within places like a warehouse so that you can, with a more accurate level of detail, understand where that asset is, right? We call it drift as it relates to GPS. It's usually going to tell you within 50 to 100 feet where that asset is. When you pair it with a network of BLE devices, you can start to triangulate that position down to the foot so that you can look at things at a macro level, but you can also look at it at a micro level.
All right. So if you're looking at a transport from Mexico to the East Coast, the GPS might be enough. because you know roughly where it is. But when you want to know, okay, which row of high bay racking in your warehouse you want to be, then you want to couple these things together.
Yeah, and so really that's kind of how we've evolved as a business and in our partnership with Ingenics. At first, there were a ton of problems to be solved at the macro level. How are my returnable containers or assets moving between facilities or across key points? Are they slowing down? Are they being lost? Are they being misrouted? As we've been able to drive efficiency at that macro level, it started to become, okay, well, I know now that they're moving efficiently between my facilities. Are they moving efficiently within my facilities? And that's something that I think is unique that GPX can do, which is operate with you at that 60,000 foot level, but then operate with you as well with the same equipment at the 5,000 foot level and start to provide incremental insights as to how your supply chain is operating efficiently.
Okay, very good. So focus is on essentially, clearing the dust, or you know, having transparency, knowing where things are, and you know the signal that you're getting is real time, right? So it's not delayed or just once a day or like how accurate can you be there, and how often do you get information?
Yeah, so we can get it up to every 30 seconds while moving, which is about as close to real time as you're going to get.
Yeah.
We can also do it once per day, right? So depending upon the asset that's being tracked, once a day may be fine, because you know what comes with once a day is a 10-year battery life. And so you don't have to reinvest in the capital on the front end to maintain that technology.
Yeah.
It's once a day for a period of 5 to 10 years, you know where that asset is. If you have something like a sensitive shipment, you know, we've had tire racks being transported from Mexico to Detroit, and they needed line of sight into where it was to the minute. We also have the ability to provide you every 30 seconds while moving, let me see where everything is. And you can even interact remotely with the reporting frequency on any of the devices that we have. So if you do need to kind of zoom in or zoom out from a timing perspective, all that can be adjusted within our platform to provide you what you need.
Yeah. So you're bringing the hardware, and you're also bringing the software that, you know, collects all the data, visualize it, shows it certain reports, right?
Yeah, and the technology is really in the platform, right? Because the GPS, I really just look at it as a medium to transmit information. Right. The information that you need to receive to drive your analytics is, where is it and when was it there? Yep. And can I have that data point over a series of time? However you want to get that, whether it's with BLE or GPS, we then translate that data into, hey, here's what's actually going on within your supply chain.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I would agree. If I could just jump in there, I would say, yeah, obviously there's a lot of value in the software, but to come back to the hardware for a second, I think we've had a lot of clients who have tried other solutions, such as RFID, or maybe they've tried to even implement similar technology to this, and it just hasn't worked. So maybe you could also just speak to the unique value of having that GPS BLE combo compared to a solution like RFID.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I was thinking from the vantage point of GPS devices against one another, where we are really seeing valuable impact is in replacement of RFID technology, which has, as GPS has become more cost efficient, it's become a viable opportunity and alternative to RFID. The big flaw with RFID is you can start to tag all your assets at a relatively low cost. There's a significant cost as it relates to the infrastructural tools, whether it's gateways or scanners. And at the end of the day, if folks aren't scanning, you don't know where that tracked asset is. If a gateway fails to read it, you don't know where it is. Or if that asset or returnable container that you're tracking has moved out of a facility, it can no longer be read by RFID. And so what GPS and BLE is able to do is really identify it without any manual interaction and really eliminate the opportunity for error as it relates to the positioning and tracking.
Yeah, we want to have a solution that runs on its own. It's not reliant on humans anymore, because usually they're the issue. And then, you know, RFID, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, you need to set up a reader. It moves in, it moves out. But if there's issues with the reader, then it's not working anymore.
Yeah,
right?
It's either, you know, you could set up your RFID gateway maybe around a crosstalk on each of your
dock door.
Each of your dock doors, sorry. Or you can have the scanning guns, right? Yeah. And so folks can go around and scan, but if they're not scanning or a dock door has an issue, you don't know where your asset is.
So it's a great solution on the technological side, on the software side. Obviously, we're sitting here together, so you know, we're not saying, hey, go to Gabriel and, do this. How did Ingenics come into this? I mean, you already talked a little bit about it, and what's the value add? What are we adding to that mix?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a great partnership because Ingenics is not developing our own hardware, our own software solutions, things like that, but we do have a very strong foundation working with automotive OEMs. I mean, Ingenics has been working with automotive companies for over 45 years now. And throughout that time, we've seen a lot of different companies manage their supply chains in different ways, and we know what the best practice is. We know what the standard should be for things like transit time, for days on hand, for what kind of rules do you have around suppliers managing your packaging, or let's say material planning premises, things like that. So what we can do is we can take the data that they provide, and we can actually drive insights for the business, and we can help our customers act on that data in the best possible way. So we've had a variety of different types of project setups. Sometimes we've actually been responsible for taking that data and fully overseeing the change management for our customer. So we'll take the insights, we'll figure out what the best thing to do is, we'll do it independently on our own. Maybe that's changing the transportation schedules. Maybe it's revisiting how the container loops were calculated. Maybe it's having an escalation meeting with the supplier saying, hey, we noticed that you guys are sending these containers to your suppliers, which might not be allowed. Or we'll put together a list of proposals and we'll provide that to our client, and then the client can decide what they want to do from there.
Yeah.
But it's really just that combination of industry expertise, having consultants that have specialized in this area over their career, and then pairing it up with that data.
Yeah, and I can speak there a little bit from my own example. I mean, one thing is for an OEM or tier one or whoever to buy something new, buy some hardware, buy some software, but then a completely different animal is actually using it, having the time to use it, having the resources to use it, the knowledge to use it, so that it's not something you buy, you use for a month, and then everyone is so busy, it just kind of dials down. Now, of course, if you lose a container and you want to recover it, you do it, but what about the smaller things where like, hey, the supplier is not fast enough, or they misuse the containers, or a carrier is not sticking to the route that they promised us, things like that. So that's then when we typically come in and help working on these items. Good. So that's the general construct, the general idea. Let's talk about we prepared 3 use cases, so let's talk about these 3 use cases. Maybe we'll start about the first one, and how things started for us and also for you. We know where it came from, but what was really the main thing that we addressed and that also drove the benefit for the client?
Yeah, definitely. So the first use case was definitely this returnable packaging management. So we had a client that had a significant amount, and we're talking about millions and millions of dollars of additional returnable packaging expense that they hadn't budgeted for. So, and they don't know what the root cause is. So they're continuously buying more containers. They don't know where they're going. They have to keep their operations running though. So they really feel like they don't have a choice. So we basically set out with GPX to implement, I want to say about 450 trackers into the returnable container supply chain, and we would track exactly where these packages would go, and we'd get updates, I think, from the sensors once a day, just daily pings, and based on where that specific asset tracker was placed, we would actually set up geofences in your system, and if a particular asset tracker that was on a container assigned to a specific supplier ended up at a location basically anywhere other than the manufacturer or the supplier that packaging was assigned, it would flag an alert for us. And we actually put together a dashboard that showed on a daily basis all of your different trackers and basically a red, yellow, green status, even on a map, where you could very easily see all of the containers that were in the wrong location. And anytime that we had one of these assets go to the wrong place, we would basically backwards trace that container to the responsible party. And so if we had a supplier, let's say in Tennessee, whose container ended up in Missouri, we would basically look back and say, well, did that come from our customer, meaning the customer shipped it to the wrong location, in which case we would dive into the manufacturer operations and see, is there a process improvement there so that we don't misship these containers out the door? Or did one of their suppliers accidentally ship it to another location as a form of, I would say, supplier mismanagement?
I'll throw one term your way, and every tier 1 or tier N supplier listening, don't listen right now. Supplier chargebacks. What is that, and why was that huge?
Yeah, supplier chargebacks is a significant part of the business case to roll out this solution, I think. To start off with, we've done this use case now several times. The ROI is positive, whether or not you do the chargeback process, but the chargebacks are really what open the door to scale this up, to a significant level. So a chargeback would be if the OEM finds out that their suppliers are mishandling the manufacturer-owned containers. They have a list of charges that they would issue to that supplier based on the offense, essentially. Yeah. So, for example,
like a penalty catalog.
Yeah, a penalty.
Yeah.
So one example might be the supplier shipped that container to the wrong location. We've had cases where the supplier received a container that wasn't theirs. So the manufacturer did misship it, but then the supplier receives it and they're like, this isn't mine. It's going to go in the trash. And so they would actually just forward it out to a recycler and they would never even report the problem. So if we found containers going to a recycling center, that was obviously a more significant offense. And then it basically created a financial incentive for everybody in the supply chain to do their part to make sure that these assets stayed in the loop and increased accountability for the agreed process.
And I think that approach is an interesting approach. It like you said, it motivates in a good way everyone to follow the rules and follow the process. Of course, it's not it's something you have to play by. If you don't play by it, it hurts you. And I think we even had the case where that approach is something interesting for potentially other customers. They're like, that's a good idea. We don't have anything like that. So again, it's not just having the information and getting it, but what do you do with that? What do you get out of that? And I think that's especially in that use case is something that turned this one very, very positive.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so that was one that was macro level. You used that term earlier for the supply chain. You look from, what's coming from Mexico, what's coming from the West Coast, north, nearby, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk a little bit about the micro level, more the operational efficiency topic. Another use case that we have was in the aerospace industry. So, Gabriel, maybe you talk a little bit about that and what that's doing and what the benefit is there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of referenced macro level versus micro level before, just thinking of macro level as tracking of assets or returnable containers or parts, whatever it may be, between facilities, right? And so that's a place where we've seen a ton of opportunity, and that really can be leveraged with purely GPS technology that leverages local Wi-Fi networks, cellular networks, and communicates its position in that manner, oftentimes over a reporting frequency of once per day, because these things aren't moving at such a velocity that you need to understand more than where it is more than once per day.
Right.
As we have helped to start to drive efficiency there, the next question becomes, how do I continue to implement efficiently at a lower level of detail once I've got kind of my parent operation set up? And so what we were challenged with really over the last year is our customers in Ingenics were coming to us and saying, hey, it's great that we know what's happening as things move around at a high level. We're now starting to get asked questions as to what's happening at a much more detailed level, i.e. within a facility. Right. And so what we really went to the market with was trying to identify a technology that we could leverage our current technology, but then also supplement it with something that was going to help us provide a greater level degree of detail. Because like I said, GPS is going to provide accuracy within 50 to 100 feet. That could be the width of a warehouse. And so that doesn't provide much utility at the warehouse level. And so what we found is through a very light infrastructural implementation, we can use BLE tags, which are about the size of an air tag, to map a facility. And so the way to think about that is we've moved to a GPS technology that's not only GPS, but it can also consume local BLE frequencies. And so what that GPS tracker then does is goes into a facility, and if we've mapped it correctly, we've identified the key points within that warehouse and placed BLE tags that then act as what we call as anchors with an assigned position within that warehouse. And a GPS tracker enters that facility, now says, okay, I'm going to switch off from reading GPS. There are anchors in my vicinity. I'm now going to triangulate my position based on these anchors. And so that really allows us to get accuracy to within a foot. Right. And so what we've been able to do now is working with this aerospace manufacturer, we can track not only as vital parts to their production line move between the staging facility and the production facility, we can provide notifications by using geofences, which Patrick referenced earlier. Mm-hmm. A geofence is essentially a square or a circle on an area defining an area of interest. And so we can then notify the arrival of key parts, and we can even track it as it moves between stations within a production facility. Because if you don't have the part that you need at the time that you need it, that can hold up production as it relates to an airplane. And they're trying to move them off the production line pretty quick. Obviously, right. Time is money. And so not only can we track it to the warehouse, we can now track it as it moves between stations and provide notification alerts to the folks on the ground. Hey, what you've been waiting for is now here. And so the automated notification framework makes their lives a lot easier because they know when the part they need has arrived. They can also understand the data as it relates to how long is it taking this part to move not only from our staging warehouse to our production facility, but throughout that production facility. One of our first key findings in the first week as it relates to transparency and objective data sets is delivery drivers from the staging facility to the production facility have an SLA as to how long they have to deliver it. What they were doing to make sure they were within SLA was actually scanning for delivery while en route, which was shaving time off the delivery time. But when we looked at the GPS and BLE data, that was truly representative of the actual time for transportation. And so starting to eliminate those minute inefficiencies that cause significant issues when they start to all compile.
Okay, great. So in aerospace is moving much slower than let's say automotive. I mean, automotive pumps out cars every between 3 minutes to 1 minute, kind of depending, and then aerospace is cycle times of 1 to 2 weeks. So I think the use case there is knowing, okay, where are my parts? Are they here? Are they not here? When are they going to be here? But then also going back and looking at the data. Okay, how long did it take? Were we early? Were we late? Because I think timing is huge in aerospace, because with a cycle time of a week or two, you don't want your parts to all arrive at the same time. You want it staggered out and things like that. Very, very interesting. Maybe one last thing, and we should talk about it because it was in the title, theft. Yeah, it's obviously a buzzword, but what are we doing with theft here? Or how is this applied to solving or preventing theft?
What we've seen over the last year or two is a significant increase in complex theft networks as it relates to goods moving throughout supply chains, whether it's an automotive manufacturer with returnable containers being stolen south of the border in Mexico, refurbished, brought back north of the border and resold for a profit, or a vitamin supplier in Southern California who's had a $2 million shipment stolen overnight. Those networks are becoming more intelligent all the time. You have individuals who show up with the manifest for the shipping, impersonating the person who is supposed to be picking up the shipment, and then taking it, routing it quickly off its desired route on the path to where it's supposed to go, taken off to the side of the highway, unloaded, broken apart, and sold elsewhere to the benefit of the folks perpetrating the crime. I think a lot of times the initial reaction for a business owner or somebody responsible for a supply chain in that situation is, well, an AirTag can tell me where my phone is. There must be an affordable GPS solution that allows me to track this valuable shipment so that it doesn't get stolen again. And so oftentimes it starts with something as simple as an internet search. And we'll get calls from customers to GPX who've researched our solution and have seen, hey, there is a way for us to get a very robust B2B solution that the AirTag is going to fall short on, because if an iPhone's nearby, an AirTag is not going to tell you where it is. A GPS tracker can be used in a disposable or a reusable use case to provide location insights, not super dissimilar to what we were talking about before, which is assets moving within a closed loop supply chain, and then understanding where that asset is all the time while it moves and getting those data points. I think where they start to then run into a threshold where they're unable to execute efficiently and where Ingenics has been able to provide some value is, well, now I know where it is, but if this gets stolen at 2 a.m. or I don't have my eyes on this platform, I'm not even going to know. And by the time I've figured it out, or by the time I've woken up, or by the time I've read the alert email, it's already gone and done, and there's really nothing I can do to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And so at that point in time, you have the tools, you have the data, then you start to look for an external service provider that can provide you the reliability that you need to help circumvent those incidents. And that's a place where Ingenics can really step up and provide value as an expert in supply chain management and providing those insights and actions.
Yeah, and this was, I think, also for us a little bit a challenge, which started as supply chain optimization and, those types of things we're losing a trailer worth $500,000 or $250,000, can you help us with that? So I don't know, want to add something there?
Yeah, definitely. I would just say, the use case for that, we'd already followed a lot of those processes for the returnable packaging use case. So when we're trying to work with the same location data to identify theft, we can use a lot of the similar tools such as geofences. We can use a lot of the knowledge that we have from supply chain management to identify, when is something going, I would say, astray in the transportation process. Is something sitting at a port for too long? Is something deviated from maybe the most likely transportation route that something would take? And I think we're going to talk about this in a little bit as well, but the next step would be, how do you use AI to start to identify some of these, I would say,
warning signs
that something's going wrong in the supply chain, so you can act quickly.
And I'll add one thing, just because we talked about it, I think 2 weeks ago. I think the trackers have a light sensor as well. So one example would be that at some point you want the container to be opened or the box to be opened, but there's definitely areas where you don't want it to be open. So, if essentially the box or the container or whatever gets opened too early, that light sensor would pick this up and gives us a warning. So it's all about what should the process be, and then identifying every time it kind of deviates from that. And, for that, you need manpower. That's just how it is.
Yeah. And I think, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I think that was a pretty creative idea that you all had based on hardware that was already on your devices. I think that light sensor was originally used for like tamper detection, right? And just during, your execution of the daily business, you're like, hey, there's a new way that we can use this. We can use this to see if the doors are open.
Yeah.
And then you can combine that with potentially multiple devices, and now you start to get a bigger red flag. Like if the door opens and the material that was with that container gets separated, now you have an even bigger potential issue. So it's been cool to see that.
So definitely doable as well. So we covered a few areas: the knowing where things are, preventing theft, checking on your partners, your contractors, but also your own people. Let's talk about a little bit the things that are very newish, and in the pipeline. So I think we wanted to touch on 3 things. The first topic I already mentioned in the beginning was corrosion prediction. So I don't know who wants to take this, but what is it, and what are we trying to do, and where's really the benefit for the customer?
Yeah, and so I feel like I'm being a little bit repetitive at this point, but it's really, as you gain better insights and mastery, you can really dive down to a further level, right? And so returnable containers, understanding loss, dwell, and offsetting that through high-level GPS tracking provides a ton of value. What you then may run into is you have a fleet of returnable containers that are metal, right? And you have a expected capitalized life of that asset. If that asset's life is adversely impacted by the conditions which it's being stored or transported, you start to run into issues as you're not getting the same life out of that asset as you expected to. And so one of the big issues that we're trying to help solve is storage and water ingress, whether it's water ingress while it's transported at sea, or a supplier or manufacturer keeping their metal racks outside. Having an insight as to what are the conditions that these are being stored in will help you to offset that corrosion. Not only that, if you've got a rack full of engines moving across the ocean and it gets flooded by water, you want to know about that before it hits the port.
Yep.
You want to know that in advance. And so we've started to use temperature and humidity trackers paired with our GPS tracking devices to be able to tell you on a daily basis what are the conditions under which this transportation is occurring.
And this is something that a lot of the businesses came to you and also came to us for asking for, because your example is spot on. I have something on the way from Europe to the US, or something like that, or from China to the US. I have so much corrosion on my parts or on my containers. How do I fix this before it gets there? And then we'll circle back a little bit to the shock topic. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit. What's the use case for that? Where's that used? I mean, not on little brackets, I assume, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's a manufacturer, especially with high value parts, so think electronics, think things that are fragile, that are maybe in a car, visible to the occupant, something that they see that has a very important quality component to it. If you are receiving damages basically off of a truck or off of a container of parts, you kind of want to go back and obviously figure out where did this come from. The supplier always says we put the part on the truck and it was perfect.
Yeah.
It wasn't us. So the use case for the shock monitoring is we can actually put these devices onto racks, onto packaging, and we can get shock alerts anytime that there's a significant impact to that container. And with that shock alert, we also get a location. So we've had several use cases in the past for this where, our client was trying to blame the supplier, was trying to blame the transportation company that they're doing something wrong in the process, causing these damages. And oftentimes it was at the client site, to be totally honest.
Yeah, while unloading or in their staging or in their warehouse.
Exactly. Certainly there are cases where it could happen at the supplier, but regardless, it definitely opens up that door for more accountability. And at the end of the day, you need to know where your damage is coming from. That will help you, launch a continuous improvement project to try to eliminate that as much as possible.
True story on that front. We were at a cross-dock facility and we're, walking through the stacks and stacks of racks and containers, and we walked by maybe three metal racks high, 6 long, so you can imagine the size of that. All engine racks, all of the engines had fallen off the racks, and it had essentially been written off as a total loss. We asked the gentleman who was giving us a tour of the warehouse, one of our business partners, are these all done? He's like, yep, considered totally destroyed, total loss. Next question was obviously, how did it happen? There must have been a crash or something along the way that jostled these things off the racks. Do you know how it happened, or how are you going to hold anybody accountable? And the answer was just, no, I don't have those tools at my disposal.
I see. Yeah. I remember, this is a little X-course, but in my first job, I was essentially a logistics line side planner, also at an automotive OEM, and I was responsible over the engine line. And at the beginning of the engine line, they load a rack full of 4 or 6 engines per rack, and they sit on little cones. And it's a gigantic rack, but then these V8 engines, they sit on little cones. And it was kind of this running joke that the forklift driver responsible for those racks, they have the shortest average tenure. There was like a limit of damages that someone can have before they get fired, essentially, and that threshold was less than 1 engine rack. So they lasted 3 to 4 to 5 months, which in my mind was always a design flaw of the process. I mean, if your process fails that often, then you should work on your process. But that's just how that was. Okay, and then we had a little debate if we want to talk about AI or not, because everyone uses it to their advantage. I feel like this is already a solution or a proposal in itself that's pretty smart and that can do a lot of things. So for me, the question was really, what can AI do here? How can it help, or is it just a marketing trick? So we had a chat about it. It's not just a marketing trick or something buzzy to use. So in what areas could this have an impact, and what are we looking at right now?
Yeah, it's a great topic. Obviously, a big one in the industry at the moment, and I think it can apply to a lot of the use cases we've talked about already today. So we're just talking about shock monitoring, for example, is one of those. and using AI to train a model to identify what amount of shock is okay, what amount of shock is not, and continually training the model so that if you get an alert and then the parts are okay, you train that model that, hey, that was okay, and over time it'll get better and better. Yep. I think AI in the location tracking side of things helps turn things from an investigative process into a predictive process. So in the past, where we might have been trying to identify what the root cause of a container misshipment was after it happened, the AI could help us identify as it's happening and before the costs start to get too high that something's going wrong, and allow us to more proactively intervene in the process. I think the other use case for AI in location tracking would be identifying in advance when something is behind schedule and allowing the material planners at the factory to know when their parts are going to deliver late. Oftentimes, it's not until the day that something's supposed to deliver that you realize it's still a day or two away. So AI can help us identify when certain processes are taking too long. For example, it could be a border crossing. You have something coming in from Mexico. It sits at the border for more than maybe the planned 24 hours or whatever you anticipated. You can go ahead and flag that, hey, this ETA is now going to be pushed back. And pair that with the shock solution. You can really start to get a very, I would say, predictive supply chain, and at least get a lot more notification of issues in advance.
Yeah, instead of having a very experienced supply chain analyst who knows, oh, this looks wrong because of experience, it shouldn't be like this, you have a model that essentially tells you that.
Exactly.
I think a lot of ways too, where the most value may be derived from AI, or where at least a significant portion of value may be derived from AI, the end user may not see it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's to do with model training that's happening in the back end based on this significant data set of a high degree of integrity that we're aggregating on a daily basis, sometimes up to every 30 seconds. So what we can do is we can use that data to train our models to improve the accuracy of the location data. We can also use it to train things like the threshold for impact. When does the impact actually matter? Yep. Or in the warehouse use case, strength of signal from BLE and GPS is a significant determinant of your success and your mapping within that facility. So if you're able to train an AI model to analyze those strengths of signal, as well as the adjustments that you're making based on that strength of signal, instead of taking a day to map a facility, you can map that facility within an hour based on the data points that you're getting, as well as the model that you've trained on your historical data sets. And of course, on the customer facing piece, it's everybody wants to go from reactive to proactive. Right. And so part of being proactive is doing things quicker. And so while an analyst may be able to derive the same insights over the course of a couple of days, when the machines are watching, as they like to say, right, you're going to derive those insights nearly instantaneously. Yep. It's as good as having 1,000 analysts looking at your screen as opposed to one, right? And so I think that's really, it doesn't need to be something overly complex. It's pretty simple of executing efficiently and training better data models so that you can implement solutions fast. Yeah.
And like you said, it's not something that necessarily the customer sees. It's improving the in data and the out data or the conclusions, and just making that faster and more efficiently. Good. So we got that covered. Check in the box for all the terms that we should be using in these podcasts. So we're towards the end of this session. What I like to do is wrap things up a little bit with a conclusion, with key takeaways. So we covered a lot of ground: theft, corrosion, transparency, AI. What would be some of the key takeaways from this? Maybe we'll start with you, Patrick.
Yeah, sure. I would think the biggest one would be, in the feedback that we get from our clients a lot, is they've tried solutions similar to this one. And they've already invested a lot of time. They've already invested a lot of money. They've tried to roll out IoT devices in one way or another, and they just haven't seen the return back on it. And they have kind of a bad taste in their mouth about, I guess, the potential for this to be a successful project for them. And for those people, I would just say, don't be intimidated by the cost or the complexity. This is a proven use case. especially on the returnable container, the asset management, the theft side of things. I mean, these are projects that we've done again and again, and the ROI has always been consistently high. And it's truly an investment that is going to deliver results. And you don't know what you don't know until you really start to, commit to it, look at the data, and start to get those insights.
I also think the magnitude of investment is probably far smaller than what folks are thinking. Just listening to this, right? I was thinking earlier when we were talking about returnable container packaging and chargebacks, right? Somebody might be sitting there like, so you're tracking every single returnable container, and if one of them goes missing, you're fiscally penalizing somebody. But that's not the right way to think of it. Really, what we do is we identify a subset of a returnable container fleet, usually less than 2%. We deploy trackers, GPS tracking, and we watch that subset in a strategic fashion. Because the truth is you're not going to execute a chargeback for somebody who makes one mistake one time. But what we've seen is consistent behavioral patterns become evident because the person who's mismanaging or where things are getting lost or where things are getting stuck, it's not just happening today, because if it just happened today and not tomorrow, you wouldn't be concerned about it. It's happening repetitively over time. And the truth is if you're tracking one returnable container within an entire truckload, you have line of sight into 50 to 60x that one returnable container. And so it's a much more affordable solution than I think people initially anticipate, because they first think, well, if I track everything I own, that's going to cost a ton of money. And how am I ever going to justify an ROI on that? But the truth is we're driving over 10x ROI because the savings are so significant, because you have to deploy on such a strategically small proportion of what it is that you're interested in managing.
And I mean, we've done trials with literally 2 trackers. Yeah, I mean, we're talking like on our side, the cost was maybe $150 or something like that. 2 trackers. We put them in the loop for 4 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. And only out of 2 trackers, we had a slide deck of, did you know this? Did you know this? Look at that, look at that. And, the interested party was like, holy cow, what could we do with 500 trackers or even more? So it's not as complicated, as complex, as intimidating as people think it is. It is a high ROI investment. I can speak only for us. So on the Ingenics side, we have not had a case where it didn't have a multiple positive ROI. So it's an investment. And I think the big one for me is the topic guesswork. I mean, from not knowing where things are, how my parties are partners and parties in the process are operating, going from not knowing to knowing. I think that's a good way to maybe close this.
Yeah, absolutely. And guesswork in many areas as well. I mean, knowing where your assets are is one thing, but also just validating that the premise that you have planned your entire business around is actually being replicated in your supply chain. So that comes to transit times, stock levels, supplier operations, things like that. It's been really impressive to see what customers have learned once they've received this data.
It's not just an operational tool, it's also a validation tool for, when you're planning something over 2-3 years and then you're setting something in motion, you can use this to actually make sure that your premises and what you were really planning with and what you wanted to put into place is actually working out. And it's a neutral thing, right?
Yeah, it's purely objective. It's a location at a date and time, right? And that makes it really just an objective data point that you can facilitate conversations where it's not finger pointing. It's not, well, you did this. Well, no, I think I did something different. I think a lot of times as it relates to identifying an issue, folks will try to explain it away. But when you're empowered with a tool that is just an objective data point, you can really kind of cut through the superfluous nature and facts, or superfluous nature of subjective opinions, and execute on real world what actually happened.
So in the end, it's even a conflict solver, or
It's
you
an
have
intermediator.
something like that. So it's more than just transparency. It's settling conflicts, and it's kind of a neutral voice in all the operational noise. Perfect, good. I think we'll come to an end here. I think this was a very good, very very interesting topic that we talked about today, going from supply chain all the way to operational topics. Thank you very much for joining. We'll put this public in a few days, and so we're very excited that Gabriel, that you joined us from GPX.
Appreciate y'all having me.
Enjoy your weekend here in Charleston, and then also, of course, Patrick, thank you for coming and for being part of this. I think for both of you was your first podcast, so maybe we can do this again in a few months or a few years.
Yeah, this was great. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.